Watching the waves come ashore in the Mediterranean port city of Caesarea Maritima is peaceful. It was here in 22 BC Herod the Great constructed a deep-water harbor and named it after Caesar Augustus. It became one of the treasures of the Roman Empire, and still today it is a beautiful reminder of the historic significance of the area. The amphitheater near the sea can hold as many as 4,000 people. Even today, people test out the acoustics, as Pastor Bob Johnson's words could easily be carried to the top of the structure.
Okay, here we go. Can you hear me? Really? Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? That's pretty cool. It works.
The city was once a bustling jewel of the Roman Empire. You can see where chariot races were staged for sport. And even today, the beaches serve as a reminder of how important the harbor was centuries ago. It was here where the Apostle Paul was brought before Felix, the governor, who upon learning Paul was a Roman citizen, sent him to Rome for trial, rather than be martyred at this site. The port city was also rebuilt during the Crusades, but the settlement was overrun and destroyed only a few years later. Many of the scars during the turbulent time can be seen, but there is also new art from the modern era and even a Noah's Ark, although the dove looks more like a swan getting ready for a swim. In the sand dunes a few miles away, an old Roman aqueduct still stands, a tribute to the forward thinking of the age. While the area is no longer the vibrant commercial center it once was, it is now often used for recreation, creating an interesting juxtaposition of the eras and the thousands of years in between. It was on Mount Carmel where the prophet Elijah called on the people to put their faith in God, not on the idols of the day. Today, a statue stands tall as a reminder of the Old Testament scripture. It's also a peaceful place to pause for reflection. The view from the mountaintop is absolutely beautiful. Nearby is the Sea of Galilee, just one of the many names for the lake that is 700 feet below sea level. Fittingly, one of the boats designed like those used during biblical times is the Noah, although it wasn't an ark. In fact, it's obvious the crew has a lot of experience ferrying Americans. The ride began with a rousing rendition of the Star-Spangled Banner, complete with a flag raising in the steady breeze. The sea was a little rough at the start, giving some understanding of how the disciples felt when Jesus calmed the storm, and a new appreciation of Christ walking on water. The crew also showed the fishing technique which was used in biblical times, although two cast on both sides of the boat produced little. A Sunday service included singing, as members of the chancel choir led several choruses in some well-known hymns. To God in prayer. On the north end of the sea is a museum that was built after a discovery nearly 25 years ago. In 1986, there was a severe drought, lowering the waters of the Sea of Galilee considerably. First, a couple of men came upon some rusty nails, which led them to a waterlogged boat buried in the seabed. Today, it's known as the Jesus boat, because it can be dated to the 1st century. The move from the muck proved to be quite a challenge. In just 11 days, volunteers, including some of those from Texas A&M, carefully floated the remains in a solution of heated polyethylene and then lifted the boat safely to shore. The boat measures nearly 27 feet long by 7.5 feet at its widest point. Today, it's housed in a modern museum, complete with the story of how it was found after lying at the bottom of the sea for 2,000 years. Nearby is Capernaum, which, like many cities and towns in Israel, is pronounced and spelled several ways. Capernaum is important because this is the city where Jesus spent most of his time in ministry, and visitors can tour several sites, including the synagogue ruins. There is also a statue of Simon Peter, who Jesus called a rock, and as an apostle, Peter became one of the leaders of the first century church. One of the wonderful vistas on the north side of the Sea of Galilee is the Mount of the Beatitudes, where Jesus delivered the Sermon on the Mount. Today, an octagon church stands as a reminder of the 8 blessings taken from the book of Matthew. Where once a multitude sat on a hill to hear Jesus' teachings, today visitors walk along well-maintained gardens with areas for solitude and reflective thinking. To the west of Tiberias stands the cliffs of Mount Arbel. Again, the views are breathtaking, and they have historical significance. It was here many Jews jumped rather than be taken captive by Roman legions during the latter part of the first century. To the east, across the Sea of Galilee, are the Golan Heights, secured from Syria during the Six-Day War in 1967. Sites like Arbel remind the visitors of the distant past and the recent struggles of this young nation. Cana is the site of Christ's first miracle, the changing of the water into wine during a wedding feast. A narrow street leads to a small church that marks the site of where the miracle took place, although the exact spot is not known. On this day, couples exchanged marriage vows, again as Pastor Bob Johnson led a service, not only to renew the marriage pledge, but for singles to reflect on their commitment to faith as well.
And so this question, based on what happened on this holy spot at that wedding in Cana of Galilee, is still very relevant. With God as your helper, do you promise to be a faithful disciple of Jesus by doing whatever he tells you to do, whether or not you yet fully understand why he's telling you to do that?
In the small village of Tabgha is the Church of Multiplication. This is where it's believed Jesus fed the 5,000. Since the 2nd century, there is a rock marking the traditional site along with a beautiful mosaic detailing the miracle which appears in all 4 Gospels. The ruins of Bethsaida were found on the north side of the Sea of Galilee as well. At least 5 of the disciples called this home. Bethsaida means house of fish, as Jesus taught them to become fishers of men. Much work remains to be done on the site, and there's a belief this is also where Jesus restored sight to a blind man. Archaeologists are trying to find clues which they hope will verify where that miracle happened. The word Armageddon comes from the hill in the peaceful Jezreel Valley. Megiddo means hill of battles, and more battles have been waged here than any other place on earth. It's also the place where John, in the Revelation, says the final battle will be waged between Christ and Satan. A tell stands to the west of the valley, serving as a reminder of the many civilizations that have settled here. At least 22 layers have been recorded, beginning with the Canaanite period from 3000 to 1200 BC. It is here where James Michener wrote The Source, which is the fresh spring found 180 feet down that served as a hidden water source for the many communities that inhabited the place over the years. Akko is a harbor town along the Mediterranean shore. It is a significant historical site as the Arabs recaptured it after the Crusaders held it as a stronghold. Napoleon would later lay siege on this town, only to go away frustrated. Today, Israelis and Arabs coexist peacefully in this town, and in one shop, an artisan proudly showed off his skills making a copper bracelet.
It's an artwork that goes from father to son in my family. Who said it's a bracelet? You? So it's a gift.
That's very nice.
Biblically, it was one of the towns Paul used to set sail on one of his missionary journeys, making Akko one of the oldest port cities still in use today. Another mountaintop experience is found on Mount Tabor, which marks the Transfiguration. Today, a Catholic church stands as a shrine. The views show several towns in the valley below, including the outskirts of Nazareth in the distance. The ruins of Zipporah are interesting as they hold many treasures, including a number of beautiful mosaics dating back to the 1st century. The craftsmen used colors from 23 stones, making ornate pieces that are being preserved today. By tradition, Zipporah is where the parents of Mary, Joachim, and Anne, that is to say Jesus' grandparents, lived here, so it's an area that Jesus would have known as a young boy. The Church of the Annunciation is in the heart of Nazareth, commemorating where both Mary and Joseph were told of Jesus' birth. Mosaics from a modern era were found here, gifts from Catholic churches from all over the world. The church was dedicated in the early 60s, and as such, the USA offering is from a contemporary tone. But as you can see, the works of art are as varied as the cultures which they represent. There's also a statue of Joseph, Mary, and Jesus as a young son, a reminder that this is the place where Jesus learned to play as a boy. To see how people lived during the 1st century, there is Nazareth Village. Guide Ronnie Espianoli has been leading tours at the village for more than 5 years. There is a wine press, a 1st century synagogue, an olive press, and replicas of homes and shops that would have been found during biblical times.
We're here to share with you a living presentation, how was the life in the hometown of Jesus. We try to share with you how was the simple life and the modest life that Jesus himself experienced when he grew up in here in Nazareth in the 1st century.
Jesus was holding a scroll like this, reading from the words of Isaiah in the middle of this kind of building, and then sitting down to teach and talk to the people. And notice, what are you doing right now? See, all your eyes are fixed on me. So imagine that Jesus is sitting in this area and saying, today the scripture is fulfilled in your hearing. Now this is Sabbath day, it's a packed synagogue in here, and everybody knew the man. Isn't this Joseph's son? Let's not forget, everybody was under Roman occupation. They were waiting for this prophecy to be fulfilled. Who's coming and saying he's the fulfillment? It's the guy from next door.
This is important for us because when you come to visit the Holy Land, I know most of the groups that go to see a lot of archaeological sites, a lot of findings, and a lot of stones and ruins. And you get the information, you get the background, you get to see the archaeological site. But something missing over there in the whole thing, which is a living thing. You need to have something practical in front of you to apply it for the teaching that you get from the scripture. For me, the biggest surprise that I get, because I've been sharing this for 5 years so far, most of the groups that I get to lead in here in the village from all over the world, the people, they get surprised that the one who's leading them on a tour is an Arab and he's a Christian. And it's a surprising thing for everybody who comes to visit us as an Arab Christian born and raised in the hometown of Jesus Christ, sharing the goodness of Christ with everyone who's coming from all over the world.
So after 72 AD, the role of the temple got to the synagogues. It started to change. So the role of the synagogue became more religious after 70 AD, like towards the 2nd century and on.
The fog rolled in on the heavily guarded Golan Heights, an area of land occupied by Israel since the Six-Day War in 1967. The region is not only important militarily, but it's also a major source of water for the valley below. And in the valley, there is a spring at the head of the Jordan River. Today, children play carefully around the streams and pools of water in what was known in biblical times as Caesarea Philippi. It was here Jesus asked some of the disciples, "Who do you say I am?" Which Peter declared, "You are the Messiah." Further down the Jordan is one of the areas believed to be where John the Baptist baptized Jesus. Today, many Christians recommit their faith in the cool of the water of the River Jordan. Crossing into the country of Jordan one of the remarkable cities is Jerish, where ruins from the Greco-Roman era are being preserved. It's said to be one of the best archaeological sites of the period, with plenty to see already and more to be uncovered. In the amphitheater, bagpipes can be held. A reminder this region was once held by the British in the not-so-distant past. Heading southward is the ancient city of Madaba, where St. George Orthodox Church stands, shielding an old mosaic map of the region. As it turns out, the map's historical importance was used in recent times, helping to settle a land dispute between Israel and Egypt. Jordan is one of the oldest cities. Some believe it dates back as much as 10,000 years. The topography is like the Old West. Visitors to Utah, Arizona, or New Mexico might feel right at home here. But beneath the desert exterior is a fascinating trip back in time. The Nabateans kept their water supply hidden and built a culture that endured until the Roman era. Rome added on, and today some of the most impressive architecture can be seen, which has stood the test of time. Petra is mentioned in the Bible, and this is the area where it's believed Moses' brother Aaron was buried as the Israelites wandered on their way to the Holy Land. As for Moses, while he never made it to the Promised Land, he did get close to seeing it from Mount Nebo. On this day, a smoggy haze prevented visitors from seeing Jericho, but they could see an olive tree and a distant spring, which is said to have come from the rod of Moses.
That's it right there.
Bethany, beyond the Jordan, is one of the 3 sites where John may have baptized Jesus. It will be a debate for scholars for some time, but in the meantime, it's an attractive area, which also shows how small the River Jordan really is. The area is heavily patrolled by both Jordan and Israel, as it borders the 2 countries, and it's very dangerous. Landmines left over from previous disputes remain a stark reminder of the tensions which sadly still exist in the Middle East. Back in Israel, Masada is one of the most important landmarks for Israel. A cable car takes visitors up the hill from 100 feet below sea level to 1,000 feet above sea level in just a matter of minutes. From the top, there are outstanding views of the Dead Sea and the desert surrounding it. It was in Masada Jewish warriors made the last stand against the Romans. Today, members of the Israeli army take a pledge on the mountain before entering their mandatory service. Nearby is Qumran, where in 1947, 2 Bedouin farmers chasing a goat came across one of the most important archaeological finds of the 20th century. They're known as the Dead Sea Scrolls, left by the Essenes, a monk-like group of Jews from the 1st century. There are 800 caves that still need to be explored, meaning there could very well be more important finds in years to come.
One night I lay sleeping, there came a dream so fair. I stood in the old Jerusalem, beside the temple there. I heard the children singing, and never as they sang, I thought the voice of angels in heaven in answering. I thought the voice of angels Jerusalem.
No trip to Israel would be complete without a visit to the Holy City. Temple Mount, the Dome of the Rock, the Garden of Gethsemane, and the Western Wall are just a few of the hundreds of highlights. It was King David who established Jerusalem, the city of peace. Today, the area is a shrine for three of the world's great religions. The Bible comes alive as so many connections are attached with both the geography and historical context of the time.
Down the Via Dolorosa in Jerusalem that day, the soldiers tried to clear that narrow street, but the crowd pressed in to see this man condemned to die on Calvary. He was bleeding from a beating. There were stripes upon his back, and he wore a crown of thorns upon his head, and he bore with every step the scorn of those who cried out for his death. Down the Via Dolorosa, called the way of suffering, like a lamb came the Messiah, Christ the King. But he chose to walk that road out of his love for you and me. Down the Via Dolorosa, all the way to Calvary.
There is also the promise that more sites will be unearthed, meaning visits to Jerusalem are never the same. This pilgrimage ended outside of the walls to the Old City, at a site many believe is where Jesus was crucified, then buried, and rose on the third day. It is Ash Wednesday, a day many Christians mark as the beginning of the Lenten season. While Pastor Bob Johnson marched these members of the faith in Jerusalem, we leave you with his words.
We are ambassadors for Christ, since God is making his appeal through us. We entreat you on behalf of Christ, be reconciled to God. For our sake, God made Jesus to be sin, him who knew no sin, so that in him we might become the righteousness of God. This trip, as wonderful as it's been, as much fun as it's been, as many people as we've learned, as many things as we've seen, it's really not about that. It's about us becoming ambassadors for Christ, now better equipped to speak about the message of reconciliation in the empty tomb that we all celebrate.
All the way to Calvary.